I mean, the first thing I would say about foresight is recognizing, so we're awash in data these days, and we can pretty easily and for very little expense put our hands on the best facts and the best analysis that's out there. And I think foresight is about recognizing first and foremost that's kind of half the battle, that you need good facts and analysis. But particularly in a time of deep upheaval, the problem with facts and analysis is that it tends to lead you to linear expectations of the future. So connect A, connect B, and then future I assume is going to be dot C on that line. And that's just inadequate thinking and too narrow a set of expectations for the future. So good foresight is about recognizing that, yes, one half is fact and analysis, but there's a whole other half, which is imagination. And we've got to bring strong imagination to the facts and the analysis so that instead of a line, we're seeing a fan of possibilities, right? So that's the first broadest comment. Now, it can't just be imagination devoid of the facts, because that's fantasy, right? It has to be grounded in a good understanding of the facts. But then understanding that if we only have a linear view of the future, we're probably making a bunch of assumptions that aren't true, right? And so, one helpful foresight exercise is simply to articulate what is the vision of the future that we already have. And most of us walk around with an unreflective, we haven't consciously said, oh yeah, this is my picture of 2050. And that's what I'm working with. But whether we're consciously aware of it or not, it's there. There's a great line by, I think he was, I can't remember his name, but who founded scenario planning at Shell. And his line was that the future isn't real yet, but our beliefs about the future are, right? And so it's becoming aware of what are those beliefs, and then, if we can, disturb them, right? Question them. So step one, awareness. What are my beliefs about the future? And then two, once we make it explicit, then we can look at it and say, okay, well, what are the assumptions that are there? And which of those assumptions might prove false? And if it proves false, how is the future going to change? And through that sequence of questions, get a broader picture. So 2016 gives us great examples of this. Brexit. So why was Brexit so shocking? Well, we can ask, former Prime Minister David Cameron, when he offered a referendum to British voters in exchange for them putting him back into office. He said, yeah, don't vote for the far-right party that wants to break away from Europe. Vote for me, and I will offer you a referendum on that question. And when he made that promise, he had no expectation that there was a future 2 years later where the public would choose, yes, a majority of us actually want to leave Europe. And why was that? Because he had grown up with Britain as a part of the EU. And his picture of the future, whether or not he was explicit about it, was that it always would be, that the status quo just couldn't change, right? Had he been explicit with himself, that that's my picture of the future, and then maybe get some smart people around the table to say, is it safe to assume that the status quo is going to remain in place? Given how rapidly society is changing, is not another equally valid assumption that maybe a majority of people are going to feel that this status quo institution isn't adapting fast enough to be well suited to the world as it is today? What if that's the idea that the public develops? Then we can imagine a future where they choose to leave the EU. So, there's no mystery to foresight. You need good research. You need to bring imagination to it. And the big part of that imagination is we need to start with understanding. what is the foresight I've already done without even being aware of it? And if we can develop that awareness, then the magic really starts to happen. Say, well, what if it wasn't that way? What if this changed? What if that changes? Suddenly that line into the future has become that fan. And that's where the magic happens.